Well, first things first, we have to congratulate the bride and the groom. To Michael and Emily, on behalf of the congregation. You know what an Ofruf is? An Ofruf is a chance for the community to celebrate a new wedding, to celebrate a couple, to celebrate the building of a new home. And you're both people who are very community-minded and real blessings to the community. So from us to you, we send you our best wishes, not just for your wedding, but for a marriage that is fulfilling and long and happy and healthy for many, many years to come. Mazel tov to you and to your families. It's wonderful being here to celebrate with you all. I also want to wish Cheryl Levick our deepest condolences. Lost her mother this past week. Should have only good memories on behalf of all of us. The congregation is very, very fortunate to have a new chair of the ritual committee. I'm pleased to share with you, in case you didn't hear the big news, that, don't roll your eyes, Barbara, that Barbara Levitt is going to be the new chair of the ritual committee, the first female chair of the ritual committee in Beth Tikva's history. Barbara is a tremendous role model for many, many people in the synagogue, and she's just an extraordinary person, and I'm so happy and excited that she's agreed, after much arm twisting, to take on this position. The ritual committee, for those, just because she's taking over, it's an opportunity again to let you all know that the ritual committee might be the most important committee at the synagogue. That's a committee that determines the direction of the synagogue with regards to its religious identity and religious practices. There's many committees that handle the outside of the synagogue, but the ritual committee is really about the nuts and bolts, what it means to be a shul. It's a wonderful time if you're thinking, you have a lot of thoughts about the religious direction of the synagogue. It's a wonderful time as a new chair takes over to think about joining and getting involved in the ritual committee. It's, you can always complain about what we do wrong, but it's better, also at least, to be part of the solution and help plan the future ritual direction of the shul. So a big thank you to Barbara, and we're grateful as well to Gladys Eisen and Steve Weinstein for years of service on the ritual committee and leadership on the ritual committee. And I'm looking forward to the discussions and the decisions that will mark the direction of the synagogue for the next generation. Thank you, Barbara. Next Shabbat is also going to be a very special Shabbat at Beth Tikva. I want to draw everyone's attention to the third page of the Manishma. If you haven't seen it, over the high holidays, I read some poems from a young man named Ari Seitak, who's a Chat grad, and he lives in New York now, and he's an author and a poet who wrote an incredible book of poems about the pandemic and what it was like being so isolated for so long. Next week, he's going to come visit us and present the sermon, not just the sermon, but also following the Kiddush. He's going to present sort of an interactive learning opportunity called Processing the Pandemic, where we're going to share our own stories. We talk about a lot of the challenges of the pandemic, and we should recognize that it was traumatic for many people. The isolation has been very difficult. And one of the things we know from psychology is the best thing to do when you're feeling grief is to speak about it, to open up about it, not to hold it in. So I thought there really would be no better person, especially someone who can use the creative arts to help us speak about our own experiences, but you have to be here in person. So I'm appealing to those who are on live stream this week, maybe to join us next week, to meet Ari, to stay after the Kiddush, and to have a chance to talk about what it was like, especially during those difficult months of lockdown, what it was like for all of us, what we felt, and share our own stories. I hope you'll join us next week. Anything else that I'm forgetting? All right. So I want to speak this morning about, speaking of storytelling, about a very poor story. Poorly written story, poorly framed story. It's a story we read this morning in the Parashat. My daughter, actually, who's in grade 6, is learning now about how to tell a story. She's learning about narrative arcs. We had a storytelling class here, I think, or a creative writing class. What is a narrative arc? It's basically another word for a plot, right? A narrative arc is the direction of a story, the flow of a story. So it begins with some sort of inciting event, some build-up. In the middle is some climax. And then at the end, usually some resolution. That's a proper story. Well, if you look at the Parsha this morning, maybe the most important part of the story, the climax, is totally missing. We have an inciting event. What's the inciting event? Yaakov is preparing to meet his brother after 20 years apart, expecting a terrible, terrible encounter, because remember the conditions whereby Yaakov left. He was really running away for his life, having stole the blessing from his brother under false pretenses. After 20 years, he figures this guy's going to come and kill him. And Yaakov is so afraid that even before meeting his brother, he decides to send messengers to go and check things out, scope out the scene, before actually meeting Esav face to face. And he's so nervous that he tells the messengers exactly what to say. Go and meet Esav, say these words, act in this way, wait for this response. Everything has to be carefully orchestrated because his future depends on this encounter working out. So the reader is really on the edge of her seat, waiting to hear what happens when the messengers meet Esav after waiting all this time. We're waiting to see what Esav is going to say when he sees the messengers. How's he going to react? But what happens? Well, nothing happens. The Torah never tells us what happens. The next verse, after Yaakov gives instructions to the messengers, is, and the messengers return back to Yaakov. And yes, they explain what they saw, but they don't say anything about what happened when they spoke to Esav on behalf of their servant Jacob. The climax of the story is missing. Of course, the resolution is also there. What's the resolution? They embrace each other. When they do meet face to face, it's very warm and happy, and Esav is very pleased to see everything that Yaakov has acquired. This is a terrible story, leading up to a moment of suspense that never happens. We know that Esav is there with 400 men. That's what the messengers describe. It seems like a great war is about to happen, but nothing ever happens. They love each other. Something is missing. And the glaring absence of a climax is, of course, a window to the great Torah commentaries to help us out by filling in the blank. They have an opportunity to complete the story, and each of the great commentaries tries to figure out what happened when these messengers met Esav. And, of course, they have to square off their stories with the facts that the Torah tells. Right? The resolution and the inciting incident, in the words of my daughter's grade 6 English teacher. So, let's go through two first of the major commentators. Rashi. You all know Rashi, I hope. If you don't, you can look him up. Rashi's the greatest of the Torah commentators. What does Rashi say? He says that the encounter between Esav and the messengers was a disaster. Esav treated them terribly. He mocked them and insulted them and wanted nothing to do with their reconciliatory gesture. He banished them and sent them home. Now, how does that square off with the resolution? Then why do they meet up and become friends? Well, Rashi's point of view is that their embrace was a fake embrace. It was not genuine. It was an orchestration. It was phony. There was no forgiveness. If you look at the Sefer Torah, when it uses the word vayinashkehu, they kissed each other, when you see that word in the Torah, there are little dots on top of it. Strange. And Rashi says those dots are there to show you that it was a fake. Don't believe what you're reading. Esav embraced him in order to placate him. But it was a cold peace, a resolution, but not a reconciliation. That's Rashi's point of view. Rashbam, his grandson, tells a story almost the complete reverse. He said the encounter between Esav and the messengers went fabulously well. Esav saw the messengers and said, "Me upset with your master? Upset with that happened 20 years ago. It's old news. Now you're rich, I'm rich, we've got bigger fish to fry. Let's just all be friends." Now, why were there 400 men with Esav, if that was the case? So Rashbam says they were there for the party. They weren't soldiers. They were part of the festivities. They knew that there was going to be a great reunion when the brothers finally saw each other, and these people have a lot of money, so the party's going to be really good. And why not join in the festivities? That's the story Rashbam says. It was a reunion and a reconciliation. The story Rashbam says happens. So these are really interesting and completely opposite ways of understanding the story, and both, if you see, require twisting the story rather dramatically. You have to read events assuming that they mean something else than what the plain meaning suggests. Rashi says that the reunion wasn't a real reunion, and Rashbam says those 400 men weren't soldiers, they were there for the party. It's plausible, but it's difficult to believe, according to the simple reading of the text. Enter Ramban, Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe Bar Nachman, the great 13th century Sephardic commentator. Somebody once said if they were stuck on a desert island with one book, they would choose to be stuck with Ramban's commentary on the Torah. That's how wise and important his commentary is. The Ramban always tries to stick to the simple meaning of the text. He doesn't like twisting things and maybe not judging the words according to the way they appear. He likes assuming that the simple meaning is the correct meaning. So since the Torah doesn't say anything about the encounter between Esav and the messengers, the Ramban says it never happened. If it did happen, Torah would have mentioned it. Why didn't it happen? Well, the messengers probably asked to see Esav, and Esav told them to get lost. Either that, or maybe they were chased out of the camp the second they arrived. Those 400 men were not there for a party. They were soldiers, armed soldiers, ready for a war, ready to take on Yaakov and finally get back at him for what he did when he was younger. But here's what the Ramban says happens when they meet each other, when Esav and Yaakov meet each other. This great war was supposed to happen, but then the brothers see each other up close. And the story in the Torah is that Yaakov bowed to Esav. He bowed 7 times to him, prostrated himself with humility, with honor, with respect, as if Yaakov was expressing regret for the mistakes that he made in the past. And suddenly, Esav's anger subsided, and he was overcome with emotion. He broke down. His hatred dissipated, and everything changes. He embraces Yaakov, and Ramban says it was a genuine embrace. The embrace of 2 twin brothers who hadn't seen each other in such a long time, finally reconciled. Not because he had given up on his fight, on his complaints, but because of a face-to-face encounter. It's not only a wonderful explanation, Ramban, because it smooths over our arc of the story. It's also wonderful because I think it's very true to the human experience. He is positing something that we all know to be true, and that is that face-to-face encounters are very powerful between people. Panim el panim, we say in Hebrew. Face to face. The power of those encounters are immeasurable. It is very easy to hate somebody from afar. Much more difficult to hate them when they are close. The Ramban understands that human beings are not rational creatures. Our decisions are often made on emotional whims. They determine our emotions, how we act or don't act in a given situation. And our emotions are unpredictable and susceptible to sudden change based on where we are and what we are experiencing at a given moment. Esav's emotions were what prevented a war. And in fact, there have actually been other times in human history where great wars were prevented because of face-to-face meetings that changed the arithmetic, and suddenly the war didn't seem to be worthwhile anymore. So what does this say about a world like ours that is really struggling to come back to face-to-face, panim el panim encounters? It's not just because of COVID. COVID will subside, but long before COVID, in-person gatherings were slowly disappearing. Virtual communication was taking over. I think we have paid a terrible price for that. I understand we can't rewind the clocks, that there's no going back. I understand that live streaming is beneficial in many, many ways, and in some ways even helps us to be closer together than we were before. But we are paying a price for the lack of panim el panim in this world. Gary Turk is a spoken word poet. And a few months ago, he wrote a poem called Look Up. You've all seen people walking on the street with the phone in their hand, like this is how they walk. So his poem is Look Up, illustrating what is at stake as we become ever more entrenched in technological ways of communicating at the expense of connecting to others face to face. And it's such a wonderful and powerful poem. I thought I would just share it with you to conclude my sermon this morning, because I think it helps us understand the Ramban, but even more importantly, it helps us understand how happy we should be to be together. Panim el panim. How we should try and live our lives embracing and looking for face-to-face encounters as much as we can. So here I'm concluding with Look Up. I have 422 friends, yet I am lonely. I speak to all of them every day, yet none of them really know me. The problem I have sits in the spaces between, looking into their eyes or at a name on a screen. I took a step back and opened my eyes. I looked around and realized that this media we call social is anything but when we open our computers and it's our doors we shut. All this technology we have, it's just an illusion. Community, companionship, a sense of inclusion. Yet when you step away from this device of delusion, you awaken to see a world of confusion. A world where we're slaves to the technology we mastered, where information gets sold by some rich, greedy bastard. A world of self-interest, self-image, self-promotion, where we all share our best bits, but leave out the emotion. We're at our most happy with an experience we share, but is it the same if no one is there? Be there for your friends, and they'll be there too, but no one will be if a group message will do. We edit and exaggerate, crave adulation. We pretend not to notice the social isolation. We put our words into order and tint our lives a glistening. We don't even know if anyone is listening. Being alone isn't a problem, let me just emphasize. If you read a book, paint a picture, or do some exercise, you're being productive and present, not reserved and recluse. You're being awake and attentive and putting your time to good use. So when you're in public and you start to feel alone, put your hands behind your head, step away from your phone. You don't need to stare at the menu or at your contact list. Just talk to one another. Learn to coexist. I can't stand to hear the silence of a busy commuter train when no one wants to talk for fear of looking insane. We're becoming unsocial. It no longer satisfies to engage with one another and look into someone's eyes. We're surrounded by children who, since they were born, have watched us living like robots, who now think it's the norm. It's not very likely you'll make world's greatest dad if you can't entertain a child without using an iPad. When I was a child, I'd never be home. Be out with my friends. On our bikes we would roam. I'd wear holes on my trainers and graze up my knees. We'd build our own clubhouse high up in the trees. Now the park's so quiet, it gives me a chill. See no children outside, and the swings hanging still. There's no skipping, no hopscotch, no church, and no steeple. We're a generation of idiots. Smart phones, but dumb people. So look up from your phone. Shut down those displays. We have a finite existence, a set number of days. Don't waste your life getting caught in the net, as when the end comes, nothing's worse than regret. I'm guilty too of being part of this machine, this digital world, where we are heard but not seen, where we type as we talk and we read as we chat, where we spend hours together without making eye contact. So don't give into a life where you follow the hype. Give people your love. Don't give them your like. Disconnect from the need to be heard and defined. Go out in the world. Leave your distractions behind. Look up from your phone. Shut down that display. Stop watching this video. Live life the real way. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat.